Hi everyone. I saw King Arthur Legend of the Sword. Now, the TLDR version, probably not for you. It's a bit of a jumbled mess, and even though it does have some redeeming qualities, really not a worthy way to spend an afternoon. Now, I love a good King Arthur movie. My mom named me after the character. Middle name, not first name, that would be a little bit too on the nose, but, just that middle part that pushes you to greatness, but no one really knows why. And I've enjoyed just about every movie that's been on the subject. I really like the Roman version of King Arthur, which really fucks with the myth, but is fun, and it has a lot of before they were famous Hollywood, and a really kick-ass soundtrack, and some really cool action, including trebuchets in Roman Britain, because why not? Excalibur is another great movie that is the ultimate in cheese, but uses the Carmina Burana better than just about every other movie in existence. First Knight is an interesting take on it, where Richard Gere and Sean Connery are Lancelot and King Arthur battling against Malagant. Hell, Monty Python is probably the best version of it ever, and it's kind of sad, honestly, that that one is the best considering it's a huge joke, but strangely still surprisingly faithful to the story. And then you've got the shows. You've got BBC Merlin, where everyone is cacklingly evil. You've got Camelot, where Eva Green is naked all the time for some reason and hooks up with a wolf, but somehow it still works. When I was really young, I watched King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, which was about a team of football players who go back in time and become the Knights of the Round Table and use their football abilities to fight a series of mooks. So, I don't really care if you mess with the story a little bit. It can still be a fun thing. Heck, parts of Camelot were great, with the c'est moi, I'm pleased to admit, with Django in skin-tight pants singing and thrusting on a boat. I'm getting sidetracked. So, King Arthur Legend of the Sword is Guy Ritchie's take on it. And Guy Ritchie, notable British director, pretty fun. I know his Sherlock Holmes is considered sacrilegious by most, but it's a fun movie where it's got a really pulse-pounding soundtrack, it's got cool action, it's got an advancing plot where you never feel too bored. So, I had some pretty high hopes for this movie. And it's got Charlie Hunnam from Sons of Anarchy, who always seemed a little bit too clean in that show for a motorcycle rider. It always bugged me for some reason. Here, he's a bit more grungy. He starts out not being Charlie Hunnam, because that's how these things go, when you've got Eric Bana as Uther Pendragon fighting Mordred, because who cares about timelines? It's a Guy Ritchie movie. Mordred is fighting in a mythical Oliphant from Lord of the Rings, and it's pah, 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 slash, and it's kind of a cool opening, if not utterly batshit insane. And it only goes from there, with Jude Law being his sniveling, conniving brother who overthrows it through the aid of magic and had told Mordred to do stuff in the first place. Minor spoilers, you're not going to care about this movie anyway. And Arthur is sent down the river Moses style and picked up in Londinium and raised in a brothel, and he becomes a street smart kid who slowly learns the value of being a pimp, making sure that his hoes are taken care of because they took care of him for so long, and he's fighting Vikings and learning kung fu because, once again, fuck the timeline, it's a Guy Ritchie movie. And he's got his band of merry men, and yes, I know that's a Robin Hood reference, because frankly it's more of a Robin Hood movie than King Arthur in a lot of ways. The plot's thrown in motion when Vortigern is trying to find a guy that's prophesied to destroy him, who will pull the sword from the stone. Speaking of which, minor spoilers, not really. The pulling, or the way the sword gets in the stone in the first place it's original. It's kind of interesting the way it is. A good idea in concept. But Arthur pulls the sword from the stone, and unlike other Excaliburs, it's a really difficult thing to wield, and you actually need to master it before you can wield it. So he's like, and such. And it takes him a long time to actually master it. He's rescued from execution and picked up by former members of Uther's group, and slowly begins to go on the hero's journey to become the eventual King Arthur. This is when the movie begins to fall apart, because The problem is, it's a movie that was meant to be a lot more movies, but then they realize it's going to bomb because, unfortunately, not a lot of people want to see a King Arthur movie, me accepted. So there are two scenes in particular where it clearly was an entire movie being condensed down into 90 seconds. One of which, he goes into some dark lands to learn how to properly use Excalibur and master himself, but it's 90 seconds and basically a music video where everyone's like, yeah, I hope he makes it okay, as he's fighting a giant bat and a giant snake. And it really would have been a fun movie to see, but instead it's a music video, because why not? And then in another scene where they're trying to convince a bunch of people to join their cause, but instead it's treated as, alright, this isn't gonna work, and here's why. I'll say this, then they'll say this, and it takes clips of a filmed movie and shows them as potential hypotheticals. So it would have been really cool to see those scenes actually play out instead of just being the really abridged version. But you gotta recoup your losses somehow. As for the supporting cast, you've got Djimon Hounsou, who's good in everything, even really, really bad movies. You've got a lot of Game of Thrones actors, one of which really made me laugh when he showed up. Like, oh my god, it's him! He's gonna betray you! He's gonna... And then, confusingly, you've got Littlefinger, who isn't the one I'm referring to. And you forget that that actor was once the main villain in a Jackie Chan movie and utterly kicked Jackie Chan's ass. In here, he's an archer who's also pretty cool. He always plays such a conniving guy that you never really remember that he has some pretty good choreography skills. Rounding out, you've got his various bands of merry men, and you've got the Mage. Who's the Mage, you ask? The Mage is the top-billed female, and her name is the Mage. Yeah, they clearly put a lot of thought into this movie. Bedivere! Lancelot! The Mage! The Mage! And the sad thing is, the Mage was pretty cool. She had some interesting powers. They don't just randomly throw magic in it for... What the... We'll get back to that. And all of these interesting, underdeveloped characters move along in a plotting plot, which has some cool banter in it, and some cool moments before ultimately just falling apart in the last bit, with parts of the Darklands coming into play and no explanation whatsoever. The last fight is kind of a little bit too much going on before moving into a sequel bait that really is probably never going to happen, and you don't really want it to either. So, let's review. It could have been a lot better. There's a lot of cool potential. Pounding music, interesting choreography, bizarre take on the story, interesting characters who are trying to do what they can with a less than adequately put together movie. Ultimately, it's just too jumbled to recommend going to see in a theater. It's the type of movie that if it's on Netflix later, you keep it on in the background while you're doing other things and look over occasionally to be like, oh, that was kind of fun. I'll forget about this in 3 months. So sadly, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword needs to go back in the stone, and hopefully in another 5 years they'll try again, and who knows, maybe by then we'll return to the high standards set by King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. This is Alec Arthur Newman, signing off. Oh well, maybe next time.